Imagine it's 1936. The American road is rough, the economy is uncertain, and yet something new rumbles out of Milwaukee with a promise to change motorcycling forever. The Harley-Davidson Knucklehead, built from 1936 through 1947. This wasn't just another motorcycle. It was a defiant answer to the question of whether a machine could capture the raw freedom of the open road while delivering reliability in an era when breakdowns were almost expected. Its name came not from marketing polish, but from the curious shape of its rocker boxes, and what seemed like a quirky detail ended up symbolizing one of the most important leaps Harley had ever taken. Imagine seeing one for the first time, the gleam of the overhead valve engine, the sense that this wasn't a stopgap design but a blueprint for decades of Harley identity. The Knucklehead arrived when riders wanted more than transportation. They wanted performance that could carry them across America's vast landscapes without fear of failure. And while today we admire its curves, its sound, and its legacy, back then it represented a gamble that either would cement Harley's reputation or break it entirely. That tension, that razor's edge between triumph and collapse, is what makes the story of the 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead so compelling, because hidden inside this machine is the DNA of every Harley that followed, and the story of a company that bet big on an idea of what American motorcycling should feel like. If you're curious to dive deep into how this engine rewrote the rules, reshaped culture, and left behind a legend still felt today, stick around. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know in the comments which classic machine you want us to explore next. The 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead didn't just arrive, it erupted onto the scene as a motorcycle unlike anything riders had seen from Harley before. It was the company's first overhead valve big twin, a shift that signaled not only new engineering, but a whole new posture for the brand. For context, motorcycles in the early 1930s were often crude, more about necessity than experience, but the Knucklehead represented a deliberate step into performance and identity, ushering in an era where riding wasn't just transport, but an act of personal expression. Harley knew the risk. New designs meant new failures. But the payoff promised to transform them from survivors of the Depression into visionaries of the road ahead. Micro story. The debut gamble. In 1936, when the first Knuckleheads rolled out, Harley's own dealers weren't entirely convinced. The overhead valve design was bold, but untested in their lineup, and skeptics whispered that the company was gambling its reputation on a motor that could leak oil, overheat, or worse. Riders accustomed to side valve simplicity eyed the Knucklehead's complex top end with suspicion. But Harley doubled down, promoting the bike as smoother, faster, and more capable than anything they'd ever offered. Early adopters who braved the change discovered something electrifying. The Knucklehead could roar past limits that older designs simply couldn't reach. And suddenly the gamble started to look like genius. Context Digest, the 1930s landscape. America was clawing its way out of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, but optimism was returning. Riders wanted to feel alive again, and the motorcycle became an accessible ticket to freedom. Into this backdrop, the Knucklehead's blend of modern engineering and classic Harley toughness felt like a symbol of resilience, proof that even in tough times, innovation could thrive. Micro story, the styling revolution. Beyond the engine, the Knucklehead looked different. It carried streamlined styling cues borrowed from the Art Deco movement, with graceful curves on the tank and frame that gave it presence even while standing still. The teardrop gas tank became an icon in itself, a canvas later covered in bold paint schemes. Riders weren't just buying speed. They were buying a visual statement that separated them from the utilitarian look of the past. This marriage of performance and style helped define Harley's image for decades. Reflection bridge. What made the Knucklehead more than just an engine was the way it merged technical bravado with cultural timing. Micro story. The police and military adoption. It wasn't just individual riders who took notice. Law enforcement agencies began to adopt the Knucklehead, drawn by its power and durability. The motorcycle became a fixture in policing, giving officers speed to keep up with automobiles and visibility as a tool of authority. By the time World War II approached, the Knucklehead's reputation as a reliable, heavy-duty platform meant Harley had proven itself capable of supplying machines fit for service, though the war years would steer production into military variants. This institutional trust amplified the bike's standing among civilians, who saw the Knucklehead as more than a toy. It was a serious machine. Context digest. Rival pressures. Another manufacturer was also introducing overhead valve technology, pushing Harley to respond. The Knucklehead was both a competitive answer and a leap forward, an attempt to prove Harley wasn't simply catching up, but setting a new standard. While the competition fought for market share, Harley's distinctive V-twin character gave the Knucklehead an aura that rivals couldn't replicate, setting it apart in sound, feel, and identity. Microstory, the customizer's canvas. Almost immediately, riders began tinkering with their Knuckleheads. Chopped fenders, swapped exhausts, and stripped-down frames turned stock models into personal expressions. The Knucklehead became a blank canvas for a generation of builders who defined early custom culture. That spirit of personalization linked Harley ownership to identity in a way few other machines of the time could match. Reflection bridge. Every Knucklehead carried the seeds of a movement, not just a machine. Context digest. Mechanical challenges. Early Knuckleheads weren't perfect. Oil leaks, heat management, and valve issues gave mechanics headaches, and owners often had to learn as they rode. But these challenges also forged loyalty. Fixing a Knucklehead meant understanding it, bonding with it, and joining a community of riders who shared both the frustrations and the triumphs of ownership. Microstory. The war pause. By the early 1940s, civilian Knucklehead production slowed as Harley shifted to military contracts. Riders who had tasted its performance before the war held onto their machines tightly, creating scarcity and mystique around the model. When soldiers returned, many carried memories of riding Harleys overseas, fueling post-war demand for civilian bikes. The Knucklehead's reputation, already strong, became entwined with wartime service and the idea of Harley as a patriotic brand. Microstory, the post-war boom. When civilian production resumed, the Knucklehead's return symbolized not just Harley's survival but its rebirth. America was entering a new phase of prosperity, and riders wanted machines that matched their energy. The Knucklehead, with its distinctive look and sound, embodied that post-war confidence. By the time the final Knucklehead rolled off in 1947, it wasn't fading quietly. It was handing the torch to the Panhead, ensuring that Harley's new era had roots deep in the lessons of the Knucklehead. Context digest. The name that stuck. Interestingly, Harley never officially called it the Knucklehead. The nickname came from riders and mechanics who thought the rocker boxes looked like clenched fists. What began as shop slang grew into common language, a testament to the bike's ability to capture imagination beyond marketing brochures. Microstory. The enthusiast's obsession. Even after production ended, enthusiasts hunted for Knuckleheads, restoring them, preserving them, and treating them as artifacts of an era when Harley's identity crystallized. Clubs formed, swap meets buzzed with parts trading, and stories of Knucklehead rides became folklore within the community. This living culture ensured the Knucklehead would never truly fade into history. As the story of the 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead unfolds, it becomes clear that the bike was more than a technical upgrade. It was a cultural ignition point, and that ignition leads us directly into the deeper exploration of how its influence spread across American roads and into the DNA of every Harley that followed. The 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead, having already transformed the landscape with its debut, entered its middle years as both a technical marvel and a cultural lightning rod. This was the moment when Harley learned the true consequences of taking a gamble on innovation. Because the Knucklehead didn't just sell motorcycles, it created movements. The overhead valve design, once controversial, was proving itself in real-world conditions, and Harley found itself with more than a product. It had a phenomenon that riders were defining on their own terms. Microstory. The long-distance proving ground. Riders began pushing the Knucklehead far beyond city limits, testing it on cross-country treks across America's emerging highway system. What they discovered was that the Knucklehead could endure long stretches of open road without faltering, something its predecessors often failed to do. Stories spread of riders covering thousands of miles through rain, dust, and punishing heat, with the Knucklehead carrying them home. Each successful journey added weight to its reputation as the machine you could trust when adventure called. Context digest. The rise of road culture. During the 1940s, the idea of leisure motorcycling took root. Riders weren't just commuting. They were seeking the thrill of distance, speed, and camaraderie on two wheels. Gas stations, diners, and roadside motels became nodes in a new network of motorcycle life. Within that web, the Knucklehead stood as the ride of choice for those who wanted reliability fused with performance. Microstory, the mechanic's craft. Knuckleheads demanded knowledge, and the men and women who learned their quirks became respected masters, fixing valve trains, adjusting timing, and wrestling with oiling systems forged a subculture of experts. Owning a Knucklehead wasn't just about riding, it was about becoming part of a lineage of hands-on caretakers. This mechanical intimacy bred loyalty and pride, making the Knucklehead a badge of identity both on the road and in the garage. Reflection bridge. What began as a corporate gamble was now a shared culture between riders, mechanics, and the machine itself. Microstory. The racing chapters. Although Harley promoted it as a road machine, riders inevitably brought the Knucklehead onto dirt tracks and hill climbs. Its power advantage made it a formidable competitor, though it wasn't without reliability risks under extreme stress. Still, each victory reinforced the idea that Harley had cracked a code, turning the Knucklehead into a machine that could win trophies as well as hearts. Even when rivals tried to keep pace, the Knucklehead's unique rhythm and torque gave it a distinctive edge. Context Digest, Wartime Shift. Revisited. The war years meant Harley's production focus leaned heavily toward military contracts. But the Knucklehead design quietly influenced those models too. While not all units were Knuckleheads, the engineering lessons flowed back and forth, sharpening Harley's ability to produce durable machines under pressure. This wartime overlap meant the Knucklehead indirectly strengthened Harley's standing with the government and its perception as a trusted national supplier. Microstory, the custom scene, takes hold. Returning veterans familiar with motorcycles from their service came home with a hunger for speed and individuality. Many turned to the Knucklehead, chopping, bobbing, and personalizing their rides into something leaner, faster, and rebellious. These early custom builds birthed the look and culture that would later define American motorcycling worldwide. The Knucklehead was not just part of this. It was the canvas upon which the custom ethos was painted. Reflection bridge. By the mid-1940s, the Knucklehead was less a motorcycle model and more a cultural symbol carried forward by those who owned and reimagined it. Microstory, the club movement. Around this time, motorcycle clubs began to coalesce, many choosing Knuckleheads as their flagship rides. These weren't yet the outlaw groups that would come later, but fraternal organizations of riders who bonded over shared machines and shared roads. The Knucklehead's distinctive look and sound gave these clubs an identity marker, a way to stand apart as America's road culture blossomed. Riding in formation, the synchronized thrum of Knuckleheads became part of America's oral landscape. Context Digest. Harley's strategic position. Harley was learning how to navigate a world where its machines weren't just products, but lifestyle anchors. The Knucklehead forced the company to confront its role as not only an engine builder, but a culture builder. Its decisions about parts supply, dealer networks, and after-sales support became critical. Because the Knucklehead had raised expectations among owners who demanded more than a machine, they wanted continuity, support, and recognition of the bond they felt. Microstory. The Knucklehead abroad. Some Knuckleheads made their way overseas, carried by soldiers or exported in small numbers. In foreign lands, they stood out as uniquely American machines, loud, bold, and powerful compared to smaller local bikes. Their presence abroad extended Harley's mystique, planting seeds of fascination with American motorcycling that would blossom in later decades. The Knucklehead thus became not just a national symbol, but a global ambassador of sorts. Microstory. The final model years. As 1947 approached, whispers of a successor began to circulate. The Knucklehead, while beloved, had its limitations, and Harley was already engineering improvements. Riders knew change was coming, but the Knucklehead's final production year carried an air of significance. Owning one of those last models meant holding onto a piece of history even as the company prepared to pivot. The Panhead would soon take the stage, but it could never erase what the Knucklehead had achieved. Context Digest. The nickname's legacy. By now, Knucklehead was cemented in the vernacular, and Harley itself embraced the nickname indirectly. What had begun as shop slang had become the machine's cultural signature. This showed the unusual way that rider culture shaped Harley's identity, just as much as Harley shaped rider culture. Micro-story, the collector's spark. Almost immediately after production ended, certain enthusiasts began preserving knuckleheads, aware that this was a watershed model. Barn finds, swap meet treasures, and carefully restored examples became prized possessions. Unlike many machines that faded quickly, the knucklehead inspired early collector culture, ensuring its preservation long before vintage motorcycling became mainstream. As we look deeper into the 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead, the question shifts, not just how it was built or how it performed, but why its legacy endured long after production ended. And that enduring impact leads us naturally into the final arc of its story, where the Knucklehead becomes not only a machine of its time, but a foundation stone of Harley's permanent identity. The 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead entered its final chapter not as a fading model, but as a defining cornerstone for everything that would follow. Even as the Panhead arrived to take its place, the Knucklehead had already carved its legacy deep into the roadways and the culture of American motorcycling.
The end of its production wasn't an end to its influence. It was the moment when history began to measure just how far-reaching that influence would be. Micro-story. The handoff to the Panhead.
In 1948, Harley introduced the Panhead, a refinement that addressed many of the Knucklehead's quirks, from oiling systems to heat management. Yet riders never saw the Panhead as a replacement in spirit. Instead, it was an evolution. The Knucklehead had taken the leap into overhead valve engineering. The Panhead simply perfected it. Without the Knucklehead's bold risk, there would have been no foundation upon which to build that smoother successor. Context digest. Why it endured. The Knucklehead's endurance came not just from performance, but from symbolism. It represented America's resilience during hard times, the daring spirit of mechanical innovation, and the rise of personal identity through machines. Each of those factors ensured that even as production ceased, the Knucklehead continued to live in memory, in stories, and in the roar of its descendants. Micro-story, the collector's gold standard. By the 1960s and 1970s, Knuckleheads had become among the most sought-after vintage Harleys. Restorers poured time and money into preserving every bolt, while customizers treated surviving frames as canvases for radical builds. The paradox was clear. One group wanted untouched originality, another wanted total reinvention. Yet both groups agreed on one point: the Knucklehead was too important to ignore. That tension between preservation and personalization still defines the collector market today. Reflection bridge. The Knucklehead stopped rolling off the line, but it never left the road. Micro-story, the cultural blueprint. Look at any Harley that followed. From Panheads to Shovelheads to Evos, and the DNA of the Knucklehead is there. The attitude of engineering courage, the balance between style and function, the way a motorcycle could become an identity marker, all of that was pioneered in the Knucklehead era. It wasn't just a machine that carried riders. It carried the brand's identity into the future. Context digest, popular imagination. The Knucklehead's sound, look, and reputation even filtered into Hollywood imagery and advertising tropes. The sight of a V-twin Harley became shorthand for freedom, toughness, and individuality. While the Panhead or later models might appear on screen, the cultural groundwork was laid by the Knucklehead, whose iconic nickname and look had already embedded themselves in America's imagination. Micro-story, the living legend on today's roads. Even now, at rallies, swap meets, and vintage shows, Knuckleheads draw crowds. Riders lean in to hear the idol, to study the details, to imagine what it felt like to take one across the country in the 1930s or 40s. Owners of surviving Knuckleheads often treat them not as garage queens, but as living history, rolling reminders that heritage is best honored on the open road. Seeing one today isn't just nostalgia, it's a direct link to the boldest gamble Harley ever made. Reflection bridge. The Knucklehead's legacy is that it proved boldness could pay off. And that proof still resonates in every Harley rumble today. Micro-story. The unseen influence, beyond culture. The Knucklehead influenced how Harley ran its business. Dealer loyalty, parts availability, and after-sales support had to grow to keep pace with the demands of this new machine. Those practices became standard for the company, and many still shape Harley's customer approach decades later. In this sense, the Knucklehead changed not just the product, but the company itself. Context Digest, from forgotten to revered. For a period in the mid-20th century, Knuckleheads were simply old bikes overshadowed by newer models. But as enthusiasts began to recognize its role in shaping Harley's destiny, the Knucklehead rose again in status. Today, it isn't just revered, it's mythologized as the birth of Harley's modern era. Microstory. The global icon, collectors in Europe, Japan, and beyond scour auctions and barns for Knuckleheads, often paying staggering sums. Their pursuit is fueled not just by rarity, but by the story. Owning a Knucklehead means owning a chapter of the American dream. The bike that once seemed like a risky experiment in Milwaukee now commands reverence across continents, proving its global stature as a legend. By the time the 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead had fully transitioned into history, it was no longer a question of whether it mattered. The only question left was how much of Harley's enduring spirit could be traced back to this one model, and the answer, unmistakably, is almost all of it. The journey of the 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead is one of those rare stories where engineering, culture, and timing all align to create something larger than the sum of its parts. From its risky debut in the shadow of the Great Depression to its wartime service and post-war resurgence, the Knucklehead carried Harley not just through survival, but into legend. It was the first big twin with overhead valves, and that decision defined every Harley V-twin that followed. It was a machine that taught riders how to dream bigger, taught mechanics how to master complexity, and taught the company itself how to build not just motorcycles, but movements. What makes the Knucklehead so unforgettable is how much of America's mid-century spirit it captured. It symbolized resilience when the nation was scraping by, strength when the world was at war, and confidence when prosperity returned. For riders, it offered something more than wheels and an engine. It offered identity, belonging, and the promise of freedom on the open road. And for Harley-Davidson, it was proof that risk could pay off. That bold design could become a cornerstone rather than a liability. Today, owning a Knucklehead is not simply about possessing a vintage motorcycle. It's about holding a living piece of American history. Collectors pay staggering sums, restorers dedicate years of craft, and customizers still use its frame as inspiration. The ownership reality is challenging. Parts are scarce, maintenance is demanding, and the cost is high. But for those who pursue it, the reward is unmatched. You're not just maintaining a machine. You're preserving a chapter of Harley's identity that can still thunder down the highway 8 decades later. For the US market, the Knucklehead's significance lies in its role as a blueprint. Every modern Harley touring bike, cruiser, or custom owes something to that first overhead valve big twin. It set the rhythm, the stance, the culture that Harley continues to lean on today. Without it, there would be no clear line from the Milwaukee factory floor to the global motorcycle rallies that now celebrate Harley as a symbol of freedom. In the end, the Knucklehead wasn't just a motorcycle. It was the heartbeat of an era, a gamble that paid off, and a workhorse that became a cultural icon. Its sound still echoes in every Harley V-twin that fires up, and its silhouette still shapes the way we picture an American motorcycle. For those who ride, restore, or simply admire, the Knucklehead stands as proof that bold ideas, born in hard times, can outlast generations. And that is why the 1936-1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead will always be remembered as the machine that gave Harley-Davidson its enduring soul.